The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Mr. Speaker, there's a student named D'Angelo Ferguson who is a graduate of Doris Johnson Senior High School, who graduated in 2008 and is now, I believe, in his final year as an intern at the Princess Margaret Hospital, which is a teaching hospital for the University of the West Indies. He was also a graduate of the College of the Bahamas. When he left the College of the Bahamas, he had to take a number of courses at UWI to improve his knowledge of physics and chemistry. And at the University of the West Indies, having taken these foundation courses at the College of the Bahamas, he received the top grade in physics at the University of the West Indies. And his lecturer told him that he was the first student that he had given an A+ to for physics at the University of West Indies in his experience as a teacher. And in fact, you know, most people aren't surprised because in 2008, I believe it was, he was the top student in the BGC SE exams in the Bahamas, coming out of the Doris Johnson School. Now, I start there because where the Member of Parliament for Montague started, or seemed to be headed, was to denigrate the promise and the expectation that the College of the Bahamas, soon to become the University of the Bahamas, would be able to produce degrees equal to the best universities throughout the world. And I consider UWI to be one of the best universities. But I go beyond that, in that if you examine the evidence of the way the College of the Bahamas is structured, it isn't just an institution which just sprung up overnight, but was developed in a very methodical way, not built on any nationalistic principles, but on the need to answer the demand for tertiary level education, which could not be met by this country if everybody had to go overseas to pay for their education. Simply couldn't be done. So the institution was created to allow people to have a tertiary level education at a reasonable price in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That, of course, did not mean that what the institution produced had to be substandard. It had to meet the standards of the world in order for it to succeed. Otherwise, the degree would not be worth anything. So articulation agreements have been signed with important universities overseas, one of them the University of Western Ontario that the Member of Parliament for Golden Isles just spoke about, and a number of Canadian universities and American universities. As a matter of fact, there's accreditation by one of the conferences in the southern United States, which is well known as an accrediting body. So there's no question about what is produced from the College of the Bahamas being equal right now to the standards overseas. And I say it that way because it's something that, a point that I also make with regard to independence for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. You know, people think that, you know, as of the 10th of July 1973, the Bahamas suddenly got created. But, you know, the Bahamas existed before the 10th of July 1973, and what independence was a legal step taken to make your own decisions. I pointed out that the British, even the salary of the British governor was actually paid for by the taxes of the Bahamian people before 1973. You know, the country existed. It was here all along. We ran it. We paid for it. Our parents paid their taxes, paid for it. No magic in it. So So College of the Bahamas exists now, and the next logical step is for it to become a university, so that it can have a number of schools and institutions which specialize under the one umbrella of the trustees running a university. That's it. And it is simply the next logical step. What took us aback, though, is we sometimes forget that things used to be the way they were. And the Member Parliament for Montague used Shakespeare when he was speaking. Said we were protesting too much. I believe that comes from Macbeth. Yeah, Lady Macbeth. She's the one who said, you know, out spot, out damn spot. But Shakespeare also said the past is prologue. And it's interesting when you hear the line, I think he said at the start, although at the end he reformed his whole presentation by saying, well, you know, after cussing you all out all this time, I now support it, you know. But he started off by saying that we're just not ready for this. We're not ready for this. Where did we hear that before? We heard it before. Yeah. Yes, independence, but not now. Yeah, Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Yeah, we agree with it, but not now. National insurance. We agree with it, but not now. So now, yeah. So it's university. What's that? Yes, national health insurance. We agree with it, but not now. You know, and now it's University of the Bahamas. We agree with it, but not now. Or at least one member said it. So the past. The past is prologue. I think we hope for, wish for, one day, when we can both get up in here and say, we simply support it. We agree with it. It's a good idea. It's really impatient of debate. All of the
Member for.
I think he's suggesting that there has been no time that we stand here and say we agree with it. Because the member for Montague has a slightly differing point of view. You know, he's basically saying, no, he's basically saying we have not agreed with this. The majority of speakers on this side have agreed with this. And there have been other matters that we have come here to, and we have had unanimity and agreement. Everything that he's suggesting right now is predicated on the fact that everything prior to this, we have never agreed. He cannot say that, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Fox Hill.
I'm not sure how precisely to.
Members.
I'm not sure precisely how to respond to it. I made the point that make this point again. On this particular bill, let me refine it on this particular bill. One would have expected, if that is the member's position, that on this particular bill, all that needed to be said was, we agree. It's time, it needs to be done, and it's a good bill to be done. So, that's the point I make. That's the point I make. And I stand on that point. I think of, just as the member, the Minister of State spoke, I happened to be in place in the spring of 1988. And I think that was one of the most fortunate 3 months that I spent. And it was entirely fortuitous. I received a call from Felix Bethel, who was then the lecturer for politics and government at the College of the Bahamas, to say that he was decamping to Canada to continue his studies, and they needed a lecturer for 3 months at the College of the Bahamas to do the politics and government class. And as you heard from the member, in that class was Tyrone Fitzgerald, Raynard Rigby, and the member for Golden Isles. Now, the reason, and I've mentioned the member for Golden Isles, perhaps to his embarrassment, many times, and in some stump speeches many times, because since the College of the Bahamas existed, and my own view about politics was that the leadership of this country would come largely out of the College of the Bahamas. That's where the academic elite of the country end up going to school. So if anyone is interested in public policy, if anyone is influencing where the future leadership of the country is headed, the place to be and to have contact with them is the College of the Bahamas. And I've approached that in a methodical way from the time the institution was existed. From the member for Pine Ridge, the member for Pine Ridge, the member for Yamacraw was also a member of that class. But every year, I made it a point, and I have no special talents in this, but it's just a point, to make the point to all the students at the College of the Bahamas, indeed throughout the country, that for our country to grow, we can't have a moribund, incestuous leadership class. That the country can only be successful if the leadership class on both sides is open, eclectic, and accessible to new blood at all times. That there's no special magic to becoming a leader. That everyone who has the native talents has the ability with the training to make the grade. And that you don't have to be born into any particular family or into any particular circumstances of wealth in order for that to happen. And the College of the Bahamas, through the education, is the instrument by which that training could take place. And so I went there every year. Reynard and I, after leaving the College of the Bahamas, Reynard and I, Darren Cash, Zendel Forbes, we used to meet at the College of the Bahamas when they had a cafeteria every Tuesday. At some points, the political officer from the U.S. Embassy used to join us for lunch. Used to be sometimes a dozen of us sitting around a table, some of them young students, talking about the future, making sure that they knew that this was their country and it was only a matter of time before they could get engaged in it. Now, the reason I mentioned the member for Golden Isles, the reason I mentioned Mr. Rigby is here's what I tell the people in this construct. When I met those gentlemen, they were 17 or 16. Within 12 or 13 years from the time he was a student of the College of the Bahamas, he became a parliamentary secretary and a member of parliament in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And I say, and similarly for Mr. Rigby, he became the chairman of the governing party within about 13 years of his leaving the College of the Bahamas. Now, the point I make to those students, I say is, now, you're in the College of the Bahamas today, and I'm saying, you look at their lives, and it tells you where you could end up within a decade. And so, therefore, you may think you have a lot of time, but you don't have a lot of time. The time goes very quickly. And so therefore, you have to know what your ideas are now, because, you know, when you become the member of parliament, and when you become the minister, and the doors close, it ain't no speculation and, you know, I think and so on and so forth. You know, Bob's your uncle and you're it. And they say, you know, Minister, what is the answer to this? And so the College of the Bahamas is the time for all of those ideas and access. And who can forget Darren Cash? Darren Cash, he's on the other side, but known him for a long time, perhaps one of the most dynamic individuals the country's produced. Sorry, you know, I keep telling him if he wants to become a member of parliament, join the Progressive Liberal Party, but he can't make that jump, no problem. But, you know, we say that in a friendly way. But people can remember 1986. 1986 was the time when Darren Cash burst on the public stage as the president of the College of the Bahamas Union of Students. And he led a set of demonstrations. Why? There was a dispute in policy in the then government over immigration matters and whether the 9-year limit ought to be imposed on lecturers at the College of the Bahamas. The then Minister of National Security, Loftus-Roke, had taken the position that the policy of the government was 3 work permits for 3 years and then everybody had to leave. And he imposed that. The Minister of Education opposed it. And the students of the College of the Bahamas went out in a demonstration. And from that day to this, he's been a public figure in the country. This, I say again, is just reinforcing the point that even today, the leadership class actually comes and will come, in my view, from the College of the Bahamas. And all of us in this place have a responsibility to ensure that those who have aspirations for leadership, in fact, see it that way as an accessible point, and that we help to shepherd their careers as they go along the way. The mayor of Atlanta, Kasim Reed, is in the Bahamas on a private holiday, as is the mayor of Houston, Sylvester Turner. They're both here on private holidays. And I mentioned Atlanta in particular because when he came here, he met the last College of the Bahamas president. And, Mr. Speaker, if you went to the presentation that these young men, because it was all young men, and I say that advisedly. I'll tell you the young woman later. But if you had seen the presentation put on by these young men, all of the doom and gloom and despair which people have about the future of the Bahamas would have dissipated in the face of those presentations. I mean, this was just perfection at work. Well organized, you know, subject agrees with verb, you know, THs, you know, it was just great. And you went over. So on the spot, the mayor invited them. He said to come to Atlanta to come and see what the work that he does. And so the Ministry of Foreign Affairs got the permission from the cabinet to sponsor a visit of these people, these young men, and a woman, because I said to them, you can't do a trip, and you can't have an all-male delegation. You got females in the delegation. But I think they did the country very proud. So even today, and I think you can look forward to seeing in the future these young men and women who are now in leadership positions at the College of the Bahamas moving forward into the leadership of the country. I met a Lutheran preacher about 30 or 40 years ago in Freeport. They used to own the Sunland Academy, which is now called the Baptist Academy. It's a primary school, is it? Sunland? Yes, right, in Freeport. I think they used to go up to junior high, if I'm not mistaken. He said something to me which I never forgot. And he said that if you want to govern successfully a population, education is the key to that governance. And more as we look at the way things develop, you see that that is very important. Because it is important, Mr. Speaker, for communities to act on information which they're able to comprehend, understand, and acknowledge, and not on rumor. I've spent many hours over the last few days trying to say, yes, I know paranoids have their enemies too, but conspiracy theories abound, and certainly you need to debunk those theories, because 2 and 2 is still 4. It's not 5. It's not 5. And an educated population, the more educated the population, the better they are able to respond to sources of information and to make evidence-based decisions on the things they're called upon to do. And in the kind of democracy which we have, this is going to become more and more important as citizens are going to be asked in all kinds of statutory undertakings to give their opinions and views about how policies ought to develop. We have, for example, the consultations which are built in any development process which takes place. And there is a feature of our public meetings now which I find quite disturbing and I hope changes over the time. You have one of two responses. Everybody says they want to be consulted on a particular thing. So let's say we're changing some rule on road traffic and like we're expanding the franchises or something. So you call a meeting and you advertise the meeting and you put it on the radio and you put it on community announcements and as the Jamaicans say, I beg you to come to the meeting. And then you come to the meeting and not one single person in the room. Not one single person in the room. And then you make the decision and then there's a big row. Demonstration. So that's one response.
Yeah.
Another response is the people who show up to the meetings are the usual suspects. The same as the late Archbishop Burke used to say, the same 18 people who call the talk shows every day show up to the public meeting. And they hijack the meeting. And their interest is not the subject matter at hand. Their interest is the accumulation of sins which they perceive against the government. And so they get up and they just pound and pound and pound with every irrelevancy that's present. So that's the feature of many of our meetings today. I would suggest that as the population becomes more educated, and we are growing toward a more educated population, I hope that that improves and changes. Now, as a speaker, let me address the point of the so-called brain drain, which is not what they were called, but this business of we are educating people and they're going to leave and they're not going to come back home. You may not agree with this point. But this problem of people serving overseas is in part a structural problem, which has to do with this being a small country. 370,000 people, a country of 370,000 people, cannot, first of all, will not be able to provide the job mobility and job opportunities for everyone who lives and works and goes to school here. That won't happen. That's first. Secondly, in a situation where let's take doctors. How much do you pay a senior houseman as a doctor? 30,000? 30,000 or so a year. You probably get 400,000 in the U.S. for somebody similarly qualified. I have a specific example. I know of a specific example where one person offered as a doctor in this country, in the hospital, $28,000 a year. And she had to consider whether she's going to accept the $28,000 a year or $400,000 a year from a hospital in the United States. So you put 28, 400, 28. That's an easy calculation to make. So you have a large, wealthy society next door. This is the issue with nurses. And you know, we pointed out to Joe Biden, who's the Vice President of the United States, when we were in Trinidad. So all the Caribbean leaders are saying, look, man, you people from the U.S., you're you're stealing our people. We're training nurses, training doctors, and they're all ended up in the United States. You know, all our people graduating with these sophisticated degrees from UWI, they're ending up in the United States. You know, so Joe Biden says, well, I'm pretty sad to hear that, but, I want to tell you, the United States is a society that gets the best and the brightest, and we're prepared to pay. So, and we're going after them. So I'm not going to apologize for that. And you can't match it. You can't match it. So, no, I'm just saying, it's structural. Some of this is structural. We may not be able to afford more than $28,000 a year, given the size of our economy. We may not be able to. We may not be able to. And various governments have to figure out the pricing points and the pricing structures. But my point is, Mr. Speaker, and I think the member from his seat is saying, that it's paying doctors $30,000. I may agree with him. But my point is, even if you pay $50, the United States will pay you $100. So it's a bidding war. So that's what I'm saying. So all I'm saying is this is in part a structural problem. The other thing, though, is I would say is that even and I say to younger students, I was just talking to during my trip to Long Island, just talking to one of the young leaders down there, who was saying that he has to look at migration for opportunities. And I say, look, do not apologize because you have an education which can take you all around the world, anywhere in the world. Yes, we want you to stay in the Bahamas. Yes, we'd like you to work here and so on and so forth. But what did your parents give you your education for? Your education was given to you as an instrument and a means for you to make a living for you and your family in the world. In the world. And wherever a Bahamian goes, they take the Bahamas with them. They don't forget the Bahamas. And this is what happens is that there's a reaching back effect. You reach back and you take your hand and you help those who are in the Bahamas.
Yes.
You help your brother, your sister, your cousins. If you do well in the other society, you help them. I just happened, when I came out of university, money was not what I was concerned about. The country paid for my education. Paid for my education. Didn't have to worry about it when I came out of school. But I never considered living in another country. Never, ever. Don't want to. People, my friends say, well, who went to school with me in the States, why do you want to go back home? I said, me? Live over here? Never. I mean, too many rules. I can't live in a place like that. I mean, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. I mean, what? Never. So as soon as I finish that degree, the next plane back to Little Nassau. The next plane to Little Nassau. And that's how I love the kind of society this is. And that's the issue. That's the issue. That's the issue. That was my thinking. So all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that there are structural problems related to this criticism about people traveling overseas and moving overseas. But notwithstanding that fact, I wish to point out this other fact, that notwithstanding all they say about people wanting to leave here and people want to do this and all the rest of it, the fact is plenty of people want to live here. Plenty of people want to move here. And plenty of people make economic opportunities by moving and living here. And the members of Parliament who just recently complained are doing very well, thank you very much, too. I'm sure they're not complaining about income. I stand to be corrected. A good living is had by many people in this country. Yes, there is poverty, but a good living is had by many, many people. And many people stay and choose to stay here because they make a good living. So it works, it cuts both ways. Exactly, some people want to move, some people want to come back in. Some people who go away for a short time will come back in. So I don't want us to have any, sort of doom and gloom and wringing our hands over this. This is not a major problem for our country. What we want, though, is we understand and accept that as a government, we have a responsibility to make sure that the economy is dynamic and that it is able to absorb, to the extent that it can, all those that are produced out of the school system. But we know that that's not ever going to be possible. We know for all sorts of reasons it's not ever going to be possible. The kids who I watch in some of these WhatsApp groups are talking about a lot of things which are structural in nature, like there's nothing to do. Again, small place. But, Bahamas is right next to the United States. There's sufficient mobility. Anytime you get tired, ain't nothing to do here in Nassau, you just fly to Miami. You can do that. That's all part of the where we are as part of our geography. It's a good thing where we are placed. You need a visa to go to the United States. And what the U.S. Embassy advises is 92% of Bahamians who apply for visas get a visa without any problem at all. I support this bill, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker.